and with a cold. So hopefully your voice will hold, Emily. Whenever you're ready.
Let me just put this in. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good morning. It's really lovely to be here. So I'm going to talk today about my experiences most recently in rehabilitation robotics from a responsible research perspective. And I'm going to use a lot of my previous experience in industrial robotics to sort of couch my argument about why context and trust between human beings is really important. But as Sabine just explained, I have quite a varied background. So I've just very quickly inserted my my little background slide about how I got to where I am. Because as I was explaining, it's not been a direct route to my current position. So I'm an associate research scientist at the moment, working between the Boston and London campuses of Northeastern. And also an honorary research fellow at Manchester University. And I did my PhD and a short EPSRC fellowship at Sheffield Robotics at Sheffield University. But prior to that, I had a long period between my undergraduate degree in philosophy and eventually changing careers and becoming a roboticist, sort of weaving around doing a lot of international heritage work with UNESCO. And then I worked for various governments in Kenya and Japan. I was managing some government mental health departments for a while overseas, and I ended up retraining in neuroscience with the hope of getting into dementia research, which is how I found myself in computational neuroscience, and then seamlessly moved into robotics. And actually during my PhD, I was mostly focused on models of robotics that were based on animal-assisted therapy protocols, especially with children. And afterwards ended up working in nuclear engineering projects. Again, seamless. But there is a real method to all of this, which was the whole thing has sort of weaved very much around this understanding of how people communicate with each other. And so my work at the moment is centered very much on exploring robotics and the problems we have with robotics, and making sure we resolve those by considering the human beings that are actually using those things. So let me move on to my first official slide then. So this is my colleague, CJ Hassan, and he's on his rehabilitation robotic system that he developed at Northeastern University. It's a telerobotic system that allows manipulation on both sides of the human-robot interaction. So in this image, what you can't see is there's a person sort of where the photo is being taken who is using a word I cannot pronounce and mispronounce all the time. A little pen, I cannot say it properly. It's like a manipulendum. I'm really sorry. It's explaining, I haven't used my voice for a day and it's a bit wobbly too. So you have the end effector of the robot attached to your patient on the system, and the therapist is able to manipulate that arm on a one-to-one basis with the little pen controller, with a word I cannot pronounce. And during studies, there is electrical stimulation made to the legs to simulate motor injuries in order to sort of improve the system and try and understand that level of how much control either person should have in order to be able to basically perform physiotherapy without a therapist in the room at the same time is sort of the goal. And it was working with CJ to understand rehabilitation robotics that I learned about what he considered to be quite an unusual phenomenon in rehab robotics, which is that there's been this massive investment for 30 years, huge capital investment in rehab robotics, but the devices that have been produced, which are all, you know, excellent engineered state of the art, consistently fail to demonstrate the greater restorative function compared to just a conventional therapist. And there's a lot of theorizing as to why that might be the case, why these robots end up in these clinics and laboratory settings just unused when they have scored and performed so well in their development stages. And in having that conversation, I was sharing with him a lot of, mostly anecdotal at the time, experiences that I've had in various large-scale industries that were very similar. So anecdotally, for example, nuclear engineers deliberately breaking large-scale robots to help with seg and saw on decommissioning, for example, because they knew they'd break anyway, and because it was the end of the day and they couldn't be bothered anymore. A lot of really, a lot of situations that you would never experience in a laboratory during the design and development stage, which would happen in their final deployer situation, which would result in an ineffective, unused robot system that was kind of put there because the people that were being told to use it were exactly that, being told to use it, and there was kind of a lot of nodding going on. A lot of these large scale, and I guess medicine is the same, these large scale, highly funded industries have incredibly long roadmaps for whatever their end point is. And so people work within these systems under the knowledge or the assumption that they have jobs for life. And what you get are individuals that are operating under completely different constraints than the sorts of people that we might use as test subjects in the laboratory. So we were having this conversation and I started talking about trust and a particular study that we've done, which I believe is on a slide later on as well, in which you then get studies that are done in situ with individuals in different countries, whether they're unionized or not, that will also get different results with the same systems being used. And how it had prompted me, mostly during the pandemic, actually, when I had an awful lot of time sitting alone to think about things when I couldn't touch a robot for 2 years. Trying to understand human-robot interaction models that would include these new mediating variables that would allow us ways to access predicting what might happen that we're never going to see in a laboratory, but that will happen once something's deployed, that if you don't catch it in time, results in a massive waste of resources, which is just completely unsustainable. You know, is fundamentally just irresponsible research. Spending all of that capital investment, all of those human hours, all those decades in developing absolutely amazing state-of-the-art robotics that then just goes unused, or some of these rehab robotics sit as coat hangers basically in corners of their clinics because people have been told by management they have to be there and they're just not used. And how can we stop that from happening? So this is just a little tiny list of things that you might see and maybe you've experienced yourself. And I should point out, I deal a lot with robotics and actual tangible robotics, but app development and algorithmic development suffers from very similar problems, especially if things have been developed without an end user in mind and thus no real understanding of how people are going to engage with that data at the end of the day. So here we have a list of things that are very happy in the laboratory, especially if you're working with students and really eager individuals, and then sort of what you end up with when you then try and put it into a workplace and that huge disconnect. I mean, it's very well known. I'm going to take a sip. It's getting crackly, sorry. It's very well known that when humans and robots work as partners in a task, the performance of that task is worse when people don't trust the robot. So trustworthiness is definitely a big theme at the moment. It's certainly a major global grant strategy focus at the moment. But I believe, and I'm certainly not the only person who believes this, that the understanding of trust, especially within HRI, because of course in HRI we've got a human being as well, it lacks an understanding of the real mediating relationships of the humans involved in the human-robot team and the impact that those interactions have on all of those humans around the robotic situation have on the end experimental results. So I think that is in part what has led to this ineffective robot development, an increase in distrust of technology and distrust in the people deploying the technology. So a human and a robot do not work in isolation, and they're often robots are often developed in isolation. So if we start to understand the context in which the interaction is taking place, the desired outcomes of the use of the robot, and crucially, this relationship between the people using the robot or with the people who have instructed the people using the robot to use the robot. It's all hierarchical tiering. That's what plays a significant role in how effective that robot is going to be deployed. So, consider an employer or a medical professional and how much trust you place in such an authority. So questions we ask ourselves in these situations include, who is collecting my data and how will my data be used, and how is that use going to affect me, affect my life, affect my ability to remain employed next month or pay my rent? How will what I relinquish to this individual be used? And will I still remain independent and anonymous if I give it up? What is my relationship like with the individuals in these scenarios? And how much does that change my answers to these questions? What is my government like? How does that change my answers to these questions that are being asked of me? What sorts of data on me is being gathered, even when it doesn't seem apparent that such data is of importance? These are questions we ask ourselves in AI ethics all the time, but less so when we're thinking about just deploying a physical robot in a space with people. But I believe it's exactly the same issue. Robots have sensors on them, they're still being deployed by an authority figure in a lot of cases, and the consciousness of those individuals using it is always, what is my relationship like with who has given me that robot, and what is my even country-specific context in which all of that is going. So if robotics and AI is a tool, it can be a tool then that is used to mediate these dynamics. And if I'm given a tool by an authority, by an employer, by my doctor, by my therapist, then that tool has the capacity to monitor or sense me in any way, whilst being an extension not only of me then, but the authority that gave me that tool. Then my relationship with the authority, so going to keep saying for the rest of this talk, is what is dramatically impacting how I interact with that tool, in how much I trust the tool, not only to do the thing it's been designed to do, like help me through my rehabilitation process, but also in how much trust I've been, dear me, I've got myself into a little loop, in how much trust I have in the person that's given it to me. Anyway, sorry, lost my train of thought. Given this then, it seems that the question of trust in human-robot interaction is a question of what is meant by trust in these broader, more complex contexts. And if we tap into that, we might be able to start to mitigate these issues that we start seeing later on. So within HRI, anyway, there's already a huge focus on trust, especially in social robotics. And there is, as we move forward, an increasing awareness of the need for trust to be measured and implemented in HRI, which has spawned over decades many novel avenues for identifying specifically social means for robots to influence trust, as well as social aspects of trust, such as perceptions of robots' integrity or sincerity or benevolence. And although social robotics seems to be the main focus of these questions, trustworthy RAI, robotics and AI, extends beyond robots explicitly designed to be social into any socio-emotional area in which a robot is used. And if a robot is being used by a human, then that's all areas. Now, part of this model that I'm now just about to go into is exploring that this dyadic model of human-robot interaction, where we plot trust in and only consider trust as the robot and the user directly, is missing a very crucial key complexity, that being that a robot's trustworthiness may be contingent on the user's relationship with and opinion of the individual or organization deploying the robot. Just going to say that sentence over and over every slide. That's my takeaway point. So, for example, here we have our typical robot user interaction thing, and when you've got your robot that you're trying to develop and you have a user, any user, often especially in academia, it's a student or someone who's been paid to come happily into the lab, we want to ask what's happening in that interaction between those two things, as though that was the extent of our system. But if we take a context in which the robot has been designed to perform a specific task by someone other than that end user, we can begin to expand our model thus. Here, we include a personal organization seen as responsible for the production of the HRI scenario. They may have created the robot or programmed the robot or just set out the robot's interactions and aims. And then finally, we can consider this underlying mediating relationship to tool use, the use of the robot or AI, and that is the existing relationship, therefore, between our user and the deployer of that robot. So we've expanded out what was a dyadic interaction in HRI into something that looks more tertiary and includes an extra mediating, hierarchical, often power dynamic relationship between human beings. Oh, did I skip a slide, or is that the same slide? Oh, no. Yeah, okay, sorry. They look the same. So our vital methods and metrics used to formalize our understanding of the HRI trust scenario might be measured at this point here, therefore, yeah, it's the right slide, between the robot and the user, our human being at the bottom there, without consideration of how other mediators of the system change between contexts. As I've said before, that could include countries or companies or individuals within the same team, all impacting results which could be seen as indicative of not only the central interaction, but which we're actually measuring, but not only the central interaction, but what we're measuring being much, much more than that. A bigger system, the dynamic of which being what will produce the beneficial or harmful robot interactions. So understanding that third point at the top is going to give us a much better idea of what will happen regardless, not regardless, specifically based on who that user is. So it's not just a case of testing the robot to make sure that engineering is working well, because the engineering is often absolutely lovely. It's trying to understand why it doesn't work by taking a step back and thinking about who's using it and who's told them to use it. So again, if we consider that scenario with the counsellor that I mentioned a few slides back, who has been deployed to discuss working environments with employees, how different will the relationship be between the employee and the counsellor if it is known that the employer has selected the counsellor personally and the employer is also currently looking to make redundancies? Yes, this might be based on another anecdote, by the way. Is how good an interaction that is between the employer and the counsellor a reflection of how good the counsellor is in this situation, or a reflection of how much the employer trusts their employee? And what if this situation were being played out in two countries where contract law was vastly different, where one set of employers were protected and felt safe and secure to maintain employment, and another worked under a law that offered them few protections beyond the day-to-day whim of their employer? Now the relationship between the employer and employee impacting how the employer speaks to the counsellor has another step to consider. But instead of the counsellor, it's a machine that relies on human feedback to operate semi-autonomously, gathering data as it works on how efficient each user is at its job, or recording their tea time conversations just as part of its routine system working, and not as an explicit function of its role. Where does the trust reside in these scenarios, such that it can be pointed at and measured to allow us to predict how effectively a robot will be used consistently to mitigate risks and promote beneficial outcomes? And yes, that is a huge, complicated question that involves trust at every level. So I'm probably not going to be solving this in a year. This is my life goal now. In fact, so I'm going to move on now to discuss some case studies that I've been gathering together then with some colleagues, specifically at Sheffield University, actually, that have started to build together a demonstration of this deployer factor, as we're calling it. So that's the potential influence a deployer in various scenarios might have, which might not be obvious within a study viewed in isolations. So we found that comparing studies currently offers the best approach to highlighting the impact the deployer may have in relation to study progression, as well as the results found. So our studies in this particular set that we put together, which is currently in review in the Journal of Social Robotics, I believe, under a final review. Our studies follow the same procedure, and they're a simple cobotic scenario with a user and a robot completing a sorting task. So the image on this screen here is taken in a laboratory at Sheffield. It's a really normal setup that you would get in an HRI lab with a very happy looking, friendly student who's really keen and eager, and a bunch of very nice experimenters who are having fun with a big robot. Everyone's having a great time. It's not like that as soon as you take it out of the laboratory. So in each study, our user populations are working within different contexts, and that became what our focus was. So in the first case study, we had a class university research study with a population recruited from university volunteers. Our participants were, as you can expect, very engaged. They saw very little risk in participating. They had minimal concern about what was going on outside or within the interaction they've been tasked with. Participants self-reported interest in robots and a sense of joy from engaging in the university community. In other words, there was no obvious route by which a negative outcome could occur from participation, and thus little reason to distrust the researchers as the deployers for the interaction. Moreover, as participants and research teams were from the same institution, this commonality, this in-group understanding, may have further prompted trust in the deployers. And to all intents and purposes, this study was, what we will term for convenience, researcher standard, and serves as a baseline for comparison. The next study that was actually part of the same sequence, because we've been testing the robot and then taking it into situations to see how it functioned in its final deployed state, was obviously more ecologically valid. And so here we have our non-academic stakeholder in the form of a local manufacturing firm in Yorkshire with a population of non-unionised engaged stakeholders. The firm employed very little automation already, with only one standard manufacturing robotic cell, which was already seen as a poor fit to the remainder of their operations. However, the company, which was quite small as well, was keen to adopt collaborative robots, which were seen as a better fit to reduce safety risk to machine operators. From the outset of the study, staff expressed interest in participating and engaged in concerns regarding retraining for use with more robotic manufacturing processes. But their concerns were raised, although they had concerns raised around their fears around job loss and safety and maintenance and the collaborative robotics which were used were more, so they had all of those concerns, but they were so engaged that they did see the collaborative robots as a stepping stone towards more automated factories, which, although would have fewer human inputs, left them, although full of quite a bit of trepidation, quite engaged in what would be a retraining process. And this was probably more to do with, even though they were non-unionized, the fact that they really liked their boss. It was very much a family feel in the factory. So again, really, really different to what we were doing in the laboratory in the university, where the questions were different and the feelings from the users were different, and the questions were much more erring on fear, but it was still really engaged and friendly. The third study in this set involved an aerospace firm already familiar with robotic systems. And here we had participants who were unionized, but they were non-engaged stakeholders at this stage. As with case study 2, there were difficulties in recruitment initially, which my own past experience has shown often impacts the speed with which real-world studies get off the ground and progress. So that's something else that's hugely different between studies that you do in university and what happens when you take them out. There's often a lot of pressure to produce data more quickly, and the speed with which data can be gathered when you want to see what happens in a deployed scenario is just going to be very different. And that also changes the baseline metrics that you end up getting at the end of the day. So of interest here then was that there was already a pre-existing dispute between the firm and the union representing their manufacturing workers. Any assurances of independence in conducting research with the university team were immediately dismissed. So unlike case study 2, which has a full workforce engagement, here there was no doubt oh dear, that the employer was seen as the sole deployer. And in fact, there were so many workplace relationship issues with respect to robotics and the observation of staff and the evidential breakdown of trust in the workforce that the study that the university researcher team wanted to do ultimately failed to launch. However, had the study gone ahead, any measurements taken may have been indicative of user trust towards the perceived deployer in addition to, or even in place of, trust in the robot. And it's a real shame sometimes that it's quite hard to find the right route to publish stuff like this that never produced any data, when I think the whole point of including this case study is that the very fact that no data could be gathered represents exactly what that initial model with the inclusion of the deployer is trying to point out. Next slide. Okay, and so that all happened therefore because this person here, oh, I'm used to doing this in person and I meant to be pointing at the screen. So this person here, the deployer, is of most importance instead of our robot. Our user and how they see the deployer and how they see their robot that they're using in light of the deployer is what's important. Our system, the whole three things going on this screen, and understanding the mechanisms of trust therein between all of these things, starts with the psychology and the philosophy of mind and the governance structure in which our deployer and our user are living and working with that robot. So, returning to our initial example then, and still having the same conversation with CJ, we were able to translate all of that industrial experience to a clinical lab setup study. And we set about arranging a way to explore the various hierarchical levels of dynamics happening between a therapist and their manager, and the therapist and their client, and the interactions therein, and how that would impact differing levels of semi or full autonomy with a robot, to explore how trust was impacting or even mediating how effective the use of the robot was being. So this is still a work in progress, but it shows how these ideas can translate. What we were very interested in was looking at the situation that therapists are put in, where they're told by managers or the person giving them money so they can pay their mortgage, they've given them a robot and they have to use it and they have to hit targets on robot use. But there isn't enough transparency or understanding with these rehabilitation robotics, which already don't work in the sort of right way that you get with a hands-on physical therapist. So there's a lot of trepidation there with the physiotherapists who do not want to injure or hurt their clients in any way, of course, but also they don't even want to make a mistake that the client might be very understanding that it was because of the technology, but it's kind of their reputation on the line as well. You know, these are individuals who are very proud of what they do and have full skill sets. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in the mind of our physiotherapist, which they then contextualize the mental model of their machine around. So when you talk to someone like that who is stuck between, at this level, we've now got like 4 relationships going on as well. When you ask them how much, you know, just that very simple question you might ask in a lab, do you trust this robot? The answer is going to depend on who's asked them, what day it is, whether they're prioritizing how much they want to keep their job versus how much they are proud of their job and don't want their relationship with their clients impacted. And all of those other questions, which sadly engineers just aren't asking at day one. When they do that design and development in their little silos, there's just I mean, we see it time and again with people writing apps and whatnot for screens, and then you get an awful endpoint that you can't really engage with very well because no one's actually thought how someone who isn't an engineer might engage with their program. And it's the same with robotics. And so you just need a lot more communication from step 1 right through to deployment that more seriously thinks about all of these different questions that aren't just, do you trust the robot, binary yes or no, but are much more complicated and take into consideration things like, maybe the therapist can offer a lot more than just a therapist and a machine could, which again is a question a developer of a machine that wants to sell that machine is not going to really want to be asking. But if our goal is sustainable, responsible research, it's definitely something we should be asking, which again is not an easy question to even pose, but that's where we are. So at the end of, so that particular paper with CJ and the setup with the robot lab has just been accepted by Frontiers actually. And we ended that paper with a list of questions for all the different people that we thought should at least be talking with each other when it comes to the development of these rehabilitation robotics, which again has this massive capital investment and 30 years development behind it. And we really should be farther ahead, and we're not. And it's because you get physiotherapists and neuroscientists and patients and engineers all kind of working a little bit too siloed and not asking these questions which overlap at each stage. And this is just a brief example that I'm just putting up here so that we can see where they might overlap. But yeah, our ultimate goal is to just get everyone working on these questions together, being more considered and context driven with their development, and thus, yeah, just developing better, more responsible research and innovation that translates from the lab to its final destination with less waste of resources and money, and the skills of the users involved, which I think is probably the key resource that's overlooked as well by engineers. And I believe that is the end of my talk. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks very much, Emily. I'll stop the recording now. And maybe you can stop sharing your